When we arrived in the forest, we did not expect to see what we saw. The trees, burnt, mangled and twisted, were being pushed aside by enormous mushrooms. Here the air seemed less murky, but the soil beneath our boots felt spongy and porous. Should we camp here? Alex asked as he surveyed the scene before him. Mela, tired of walking, took off her sack and placed it gingerly on the ground. Even if we don't camp, we will need a rest, she said as she began to rummage. I wouldn't be so quick to trust this, I said through clenched teeth. Mushrooms have spores, and these mushrooms are growing because of the radioactive soil. They clean it. So they are good. Edible maybe? I'm starving. Mark was always starving. No, I said decisively. Would you eat the rag that cleaned the oil spill? These would be poisonous even if they were the edible sort of mushroom. We should not stay here for long. Besides, do you hear anything? Any bird calls or animal noises? I looked around at the group. Sometimes I felt like a camp leader to a bunch of 7-year-old brownies. I had to remind myself that these were not children. Not anymore. Becca tried to touch one of the mushrooms, but I was happy to see that Alex smacked her hand away. Do not touch. He said to her sternly, don't you remember what happened to Tony? She looked up at him, eyes filled with fear, brimming with tears, and backed away from the mushroom. Alex sighed and put an arm around her. It's okay, he said, we just have to be careful. There were 6 of us in our little group, there had been 10 when we set off. Our hiding place had become compromised, and we had no choice but to flee. This must have been a few months ago, but it's hard to keep track of time since it happened. We picked our way through what felt like the mushroom forest, trying hard not to touch the fruiting heads of the strange-looking fungus. Our faces covered with old rags against the spores and air pollution. After a few hours we came to the edge and found a clearing. Stunted yellowed grass littered the bare dry earth, the color of old elephant skin. It looked sick and unhealthy, but when you put your weight on it, it was firm. I gathered the lot in the center and had them set up our one large tent. Meanwhile I took out the alarm posts and made us a crude perimeter. The sun was beginning to set, and I knew I would need to hunt for water. With only one pistol it would be dangerous, but what could I do? I set Tria to guard the camp. She could not speak, but had the sharpest eyes of any of us. She could hear better, and if anything came along the girl could make a racket no one would miss. She never spoke, but her desires and intentions were always clear. Alex asked to go with me, but I told him to stay with the camp. If anything happened to me, he would be the next to lead. He nodded at me solemnly and went back to the group. I took one last look before slipping back into the forest to find water. When I was young, I knew this forest like the back of my hand. Now though, after everything that happened, everything looked different. Trees I had known since childhood were gone, or fallen, great sentinels that I was sure would stand forever, but here they were, burnt out, skeletal, and now host to these giant alien-looking mushrooms. The world had shifted. To my left I noticed the carcass of an old cabin. The frame mostly burnt away, but still recognizable as a structure, and not a natural occurring one. I approached cautiously. Though there were not a lot of animals around anymore, there were still dangers. People who had succumbed, for instance, could give you a nasty infection which could maim or kill you. They themselves were weak and slow-moving, but that is how you end up getting too close. Inside the frame I found a trapdoor and stone steps leading down into a cellar. I made my way down using a candle stub for light. Here things seemed relatively untouched. Preserved, I supposed, by the trapdoor and the location of the cellar. Underground could be the safest or deadliest depending on how the earth felt beneath your feet. Solid good, spongy bad. Score. I said, elated as I noticed the shelves to the left laden with cans and jugs. I rummaged in the supplies, finding enough to keep us going for at least a week. Relieved, I began packing items into my knapsack. When I found the box of chocolates I nearly whooped with delight, then I remembered where I was. This guy must have been one of those doomsday preppers, and I said a silent thank you for his foresight. Too bad it did not help him any in the end. I gathered what I could carry, and then added a little more. The kids would help me carry it, and it would not stay heavy for long. I made my way back up cautiously. It was eerily silent, and now fully dark. This would be the worst time to make it through the forest, but it could not be helped. I sent up a silent prayer, to the darkness, the universe, whoever might be listening, and picked my way by candlelight. Above the stars sparkled their strange sparkle, distorted by the chemicals in the air. The air smelled of damp and rot, but at least it was not the usually singed meat smell we had all gotten used to. It took me what felt like ages to get back to the group. As I hit the perimeter alarm, I whispered the password and Trya nodded at me. She had spotted me ages ago. How she recognized me in the dark I will never know. Everyone else was asleep by the time I came back into our large tent. After organizing our new supplies, I hid the box of chocolates away, hoping to surprise the kids with it later. Trya watched me and then touched my arm. She looked meaningfully at where I had hidden the box, and I put a finger to my lips to indicate this was our little secret. I winked at her and she rolled her eyes. Nothing got past her, I thought. I smiled and sent her off to bed. In the morning we shared a meager breakfast as I regaled them with my last night's adventures. I told them of the perils and how I fought a mutant mushroom who gifted me with a magic box full of sweet treasure. Mela and Alex both rolled their eyes at me, but Mark and Becca were enthralled. How long, I wondered, would it be before they became cynical and reality-laden like their older siblings? With a great theatrical bow I pulled the box from its hiding place and opened it for all to see. "What are those?" asks Becca a little dubiously. She looked around and saw the elated faces. Convinced, she looked back at the chocolates sitting in their neat little cups. "Try one," I say, smiling down at her. "Just remember, this is a rare treat. We may never see these again, so take tiny bites, savor it." Everyone took a chocolate and together we sat in a circle. The grins were priceless. Faces lighting up with new discoveries or sweet memory of a world that had left us behind. Despite all the dangers and desperate need to survive, we could still find these tiny moments of joy. For the first time in a long time, I was thankful not just to be alive but to have this family. No future was guaranteed, but right now, this moment, it was perfect. Life could still be beautiful and I, despite everything, was still very much alive.